Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast. And Mark, what's your beer?
Here we go. So, I'm going to have to put it in front of the light here.
Looks like
This is from the Chiltern Brewery, and I thought I'd get a somewhat local beer, delivered freshly today, directly from the brewery, and I've got John Hampden's Golden Harvest Ale. There you are.
That's very environmentally friendly. From a little bit further abroad, I have the Tegernsee Pils. I don't know where this is from.
Presumably from the Tegernsee.
From the Tegernsee. Yeah.
Do you know where the Tegernsee is?
No. I'm gonna say like maybe South Germany. Who knows?
Few people looking it up on a map.
Yeah. So, Mark, today we are going to talk about Impact 12, which will mean nothing to anyone. So my very first question is, Mark, what is Impact 12?
Well, last time we were talking about social ventures and what do you need to get social ventures to become a success. And one of the things that you need is funding. And so Impact 12 is a fund for social ventures that we are putting together in collaboration with 12 universities. And the 12 universities are, now can you count to make sure I remember them all? I always get them in a different order each time. Okay. They are Oxford, Cambridge, Northampton, Coventry, Birmingham, Warwick, Keele, Cranfield, Nottingham, Leicester, Loughborough, and how am I doing now?
That's 11.
Oh, damn it, I've missed one again. Aston, there you go, got Aston. There in the end.
Okay,
so those last 8 are the micro universities. So there's a collaboration of Midlands universities who have joined, and it's actually where all of this started at a conference in Telford 3 years ago.
That sounds great, but what problem does Impact 12 solve?
Well, it solves the problem that we've got social ventures coming out of the university which look different to your typical social venture. Okay. In a typical social venture, you'll start a social venture, social enterprise. You'll do your product development within the company. You'll maybe do a few deals, sell a few products, and the money will start trickling in. And typical social venture funds, social impact funds are based on that model, that there's income coming into the company, they start to sell things, and away you go. That's not the case with companies that come out of universities. They generally have developed their idea, they've tested it out within the university. And so what they wanted to do is transfer that into a company and hit the ground running with a big lump of investment. And that's what we're trying to solve here. So the investment size is seed stage. So it would be a few £100,000. So typically seed stage is between, I don't know, anything from about 300,000 up to £1 million. But the difference also is that with that, this fund is going to be it's going to be able to do both equity investments and to provide loans to the company. Why is that important? Well, some of the companies that we're pumping out are companies limited by a guarantee. Most people are familiar with shares companies. You've got people buy shares in companies and you can sell them, and the company has an intrinsic value. Guaranteed companies have a charity structure, so you have members of the company, and thereby they don't own any equity. The company can hold assets, it can trade just like any normal company, but it isn't something that can be sold. So it can't be financed through equity because there is no company to sell. So the only way that it could be financed in this way is through a loan. So in order to be able to service our whole portfolio of social ventures, we need to have equity and loan finance as well. So those are the problems that we're solving with this.
Well, then my second question would be, you've alluded to it a little bit, but creating a fund is a lot of work. There is the big society capital. There are impact investors who have a lot of experience in the UK. Why can't any of them sort of step into the breach? Why is a university or a group of universities doing this?
Well, I mean, they might do, yeah. They might want to invest in it. And if you want to invest, do let me know. So why haven't they done it? So why the university's taking a lead on this? I mean, well, it's because of the impact agenda again, and this is a mechanism by which they want to make impacts from their research, and just as Dave Norwood did with IP Group, decades ago, setting that up, the type of models that are required to commercialize university research are sort of work differently in the way that typical companies are set up. And in order to do that, you need to be able to put some effort in and sort of firstly explaining why the ways in which you're adding value to people who could finance it, say how it's different, and explain why the risks that they are typically associated with financing social ventures are different from university-based companies. So go on.
Well, so I mean, one thing I always think about is when we think about social ventures, I think most people have almost two models in their head. They have the small local social enterprise that you might see on a high street. We, for example, have Yellow Submarine in Oxford, and that's one type. And then the other type they usually hear about are the massive social enterprises like Tom's Shoes or something that give away a pair of shoes every time somebody buys them, or they're a tech for good company with super scalable growth. Are university social ventures different from either of those categories?
I think it's probably the latter that we're looking to be pumping out. I mean, the thesis of the fund is that it's an impact fund. That's why it's called Impact 12. If you're going to make impact, you have to do it at scale. So you have to have a scalable proposition. Mm-hmm. So now it doesn't mean to say that the smaller companies aren't going to have an effect in their community. But I would imagine, certainly for this first fund, we're going to be looking at, we're trying to demonstrate that you can go from zero to something really quite big and make a big impact, and also make a return to investors as well.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that's obvious is what kind of ventures can we, or do we think we're going to see come through this fund if it all goes well?
So the first of all, what we've done is we pulled together the 12 universities because we want to have a diverse pipeline. Mm-hmm. The reason that we're doing it is because the impact capital that does exists in London. And what we're wanting to do is to put some infrastructure in around the universities outside of London, so that we're pulling and drawing other people who are operating in this space towards all the great ideas that are coming out of places that are outside of London. But we do have a really diverse group of universities involved. So we've got Oxford and Cambridge, whose reach is international. A lot of the stuff that's developed we have things which are targeted at things in the UK, but we also have things which targeted. We do research, for instance, across the developing nations. A lot of work going down in sub-Saharan Africa, or in the medical fields, mm-hmm. whether it's training or whether it's interventions on tropical diseases. But there is also a lot of social research which goes on as well. So that there's also international development, geography, economics, those sorts of departments who are doing research in India, in Southeast Asia, LATAM, and trying to and I've got methodologies and interventions there which are able to bring people out of poverty or help with water management or something like that. And then you've got, for instance, Cambridge, who have a larger engineering offering, and so you've got lots of solutions for environmental problems there as well, and Oxford does as well. But then you've also got companies that are coming out of Coventry and Northampton, which are very much focused on the local communities. Now, because they're focused on the local communities first, doesn't necessarily mean that this is just going to be for, say, people in Coventry or Northampton, but it is a sort of a local or regionally based solution, which could then roll out nationally. For instance, suppliers of services to the NHS and mental health companies and all sorts of things. So there's a great diversity in the sort of stuff that's coming out of these universities. And the idea of this fund is to de-risk it for lead investors, so that you've got these social impact investors who are leads, who are going to say, well, I'm particularly concerned with healthcare or mental health or something like that, and they would take the financial lead, and that the Impact 12 fund is there to de-risk it by pairing up with them, putting some more money in, and taking the impact lead. So they are going to measure the impact of the venture as it goes, as it grows over the years.
Well, you preempted my next question, because I was going to ask, usually with an investor, you don't just want the money, you want all the experience they have within the particular sector that you're usually in. That's why they go in with you, because they really understand digital health or therapeutics or international development. And the obvious thing with Impact 12 is it's covering such a broad array of issues that it would be difficult for Impact 12 alone to provide all that expertise. But as you say, it's almost just there to incentivize that more specialized investor to go in by de-risking it. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, it would be fair also to say that Impact 12 is probably going to prefer certain areas over the others. We're sort of working through the details of that at the moment. But that's certainly in terms of the equity investments, that's exactly how it's going to work. It's there to. We have a similar operating fund within Oxford. It also occurs in Cambridge, in Bristol, which is operated by Parkwalk Advisors, and which is an SEIS fund. So these funds are ones which individual, high net worth are able to put money into an investment fund, use the tax breaks associated with investment to go into really high risk early stage companies, and they put in £250,000 per deal, and what they essentially do is they're not necessarily a sleeping partner, but sort of in the background, but there to de-risk it for the lead investor. This Impact 12 is going to be different, because it'll be de-risking it for everybody else, but it could well end up being an investor directorate, so it could actually coordinate around and bring others to the table, and it's going to be much more active in helping the ventures fundraise, and also to measure and track their impact.
Okay, well, this all makes a lot of sense, but now I have maybe a slightly harder nosed question. Most VC funds, as everyone knows, basically make all their money off a handful of companies, and they basically lose money on almost everything else. And that's VC funds that focus solely on, high growth, high profit margin companies, usually ones that they hope will get big acquisitions or IPOs. The social venture world, I think it is fair, generally does not make those kinds of margins, because they're not focused on making those kinds of margins, and that usually at a minimum their user, and often sometimes their customer, are often the poorer, more marginalized communities in the world who aren't going to be massive premium consumers. So how will this fund break even? How will it manage itself financially?
Well, typically in in the mainstream, it's about trying to focus on making a profit and bringing money in, and it goes. And for instance, if you were to look at OSI, Oxford Sciences Innovation, it's going for massive growth in a relatively short period of time. With this, we're talking about ventures whose growth is more steady, and if it's more steady, interestingly enough, there's research which indicates strongly that the companies that take more into account at the early stage the impact that they're having on the world, if they do theory of change, all those sorts of pieces of work, they end up building a more sustainable proposition. Yes, you might not necessarily get the astronomical growth that you would hope for under the mainstream model, but maybe it does suggest that the risk of failure actually goes down. But there are other things. I mean, measuring impact does cost money. I mean, you have to do some work. You need to get experts to help you sort of develop your impact measurement, and obviously you need people to sit on boards to track the impact, and so that there are costs associated with that, and those costs are built into the modelling in the sense that, you know, the venture will be will have to pay fees. Investors will have to pay fees as well.
So let's back up a bit there. For the lay listener, what is impact and how does it differ from any normal for-profit company?
Well, the impact is actually tracking and measuring the way in which your what you do affects the world around you.
Okay.
And social ventures are set up specifically to try and make a difference, to try and make an impact and to improve a positive impact on the thing that they care about most, whether it's poverty, the environment, health, whatever. And it's normally written into their articles of association to say this is the effect that we want to make. They don't normally say how they're going to make it or by how much they're going to make it, but there is normally something associated with that which you could normally quantify, and that's what you do through your theory of change. Your theory of change is you talk to all your stakeholders, and you work out how you're going to work with them, how you're going to what their problems are, and how you can work alongside them and partner with them to make the effect that they need and you want to help them make. And then you devise through that theory of change process a model and some indicators as to how you're going to affect those changes. And so that piece of work takes a lot of resource, and those are built into the costs of maintaining and running the fund.
That makes a lot of sense. And I suppose one thing that is perhaps a little bit surprising is, even though we often think of every company that usually comes to mind, be it Spotify or Nike, and they obviously do very different things, but actually most of their primary focus is being on a profitable company. When they have their shareholder meetings and they do their financial reporting every quarter, they are mainly reporting on revenue and profit, which means that is the main focus. And I guess the big difference with social ventures is that although they have to be financially sustainable, they measure themselves and judge themselves and are basically constitutionally required to focus on their specific purpose above that profit. Their main purpose might be solving a particular medical problem or alleviating a type of poverty. Is that correct?
I think there's variation. I would say on average, they consider profitability and impact equally. And I think that a healthy social venture is where those two are balanced against each other. I mean, for instance, the whole point of having a social venture and having that purpose embedded within your articles of association is to guide the directors on the decisions that they make within those companies as to where are they going to prioritize the resources of the company over the next few months, so that it can at the same time be profitable as well and sustainable, as well as making the impact that it was planning to make. So I have just been in a board meeting this afternoon, for instance, and we've been discussing where it is most effective to deploy that impact agenda during the coronavirus pandemic. Where does the company prioritize its resources, given, and then you have to balance, given the fact that a lot of the places in which the company is operating is absolutely, COVID is going rampant at the moment. It's going up exponentially, and none of the companies, none of the partners that they're dealing with have got the time to even interact with the company at the moment. And is the company likely to be more sustainable and more profitable if it's operating in areas where people have actually got the time to deal with them? And that's the whole point. You balance the profitability against the impact agenda, whereas if it was just a profit-driven company, the answer would be obvious.
That makes sense. what does success look like for Impact 12? If we're 3 years down the line after we've launched, how will you know it's made a difference?
That it's that it's still going is the first one.
Doesn't Impact 12 need to judge itself by more than its mere existence?
No, I'm working from the bottom up, right? So is it still going? That's the first one. Has it been able to successfully deploy its capital? Has it been able to find things which, according to its risk profile and it's been able to find, it's been able to put money towards? The beautiful thing about having a mixed fund is that loans and equity investments, the loans are more liquid, so that you can actually, what does that mean? It means that the money comes back earlier, rather than being completely locked up in equity, which means you only get the money back when you sell the company, right? With loans, you're actually able to say, well, are these companies, are we building these ventures up? Are they able to finance the debt? And we should be able to have indicators that these companies are actually growing and that we're going to get the money back. And on that basis, we're able to say, right, we know what we're doing now. Let's start another fund. Let's do a healthcare focused one, or let's do one just focused on Northampton, and or let's do one just focused on Oxford and the greater area around Oxford. Or however you want to stratify it, it's to provide data to show that this sort of fund can work, and then actually being able to say that, first 3 years of a social venture, are you actually going to be showing any significant impact? You should, at that stage in your first investments, be able to actually see that you're actually following the curve, you're following those indicators, and that you're following the line to something which will eventually result in a great impact 5 or 10 years down the line.
So here's maybe a harder question, but I think you kind of picked up on this theme in your answer there. Do you think that if funds like Impact 12 are successful, that there are a stream of research-based, university social ventures funded and flourishing, that this will change the nature of philanthropic funding to universities, because they increasingly see that ventures, as much as other things that they fund, such as potentially research, might be a way to get more impact, more bang for their buck? Could the two be in conflict, or do you think not, and it might, but it still might change it?
Oh, yes. Now then, how open do I want to be on that one? I'll let you into a secret. Let's put it this way. The high net worth, the people that have gone into the city and have made some money, who are alumni of the University of Oxford and of Cambridge, are increasingly going back to their colleges. So these are the targets of development offices and things like that, saying, okay, so what are you doing about, obviously you can donate money to the university and, build a new library, all these sorts of things or a new department, these sorts of things that happen. But what about the effect that the university has? And where are you deploying your capital? And they're starting to ask some very sort of awkward questions of universities. Where, and dare I say, there's an element of alumni are saying, I'd actually like you to be more responsible and more sustainable in the way in which you invest your money. And I think that, so the question, what was the question again? Like specifically the question?
The question was, do you think it would change the nature of philanthropic funding? At the moment, I guess the question was, at the moment, universities do get a lot of philanthropic funding, and a lot of it goes towards research. And that a lot of the time that's funded because the funder thinks that if we understand a particular problem or develop a solution to a problem, that's the best way to solve a problem. And that's obviously true. Yeah. But could there be the case where they shift some of that funding more towards saying, we want you to create a venture out of this. And we're not going to fund quite as much research because we want you a little bit more further downstream at the kind of implementation phase where the social venture is just delivering.
And there you captured the quandary, isn't it? Because, shifting the funding means that does that mean that you're taking money away from research? So and I actually think that what you're going to get is you're going to get an increased number of people who are interested in philanthropy, who are going to put money into projects where they can say, right, I'm going to give you this money once, but I don't want to give you the money again because I want to see that impact grow and grow. And I do think that the commercialization through social ventures is one of the ways in which you can do that. So obviously, when you do research, you pay a postdoc or you PhD student, they push out a paper and that money is gone, right? But then the question then becomes, well, what happens next? And is the commercialization through social ventures a worthwhile way of trying to sustain and grow that impact? And certainly the messages that I'm hearing from certain people within the university and from alumni and from other philanthropists is, yes, that shift is going to happen.
Well, then I'm going to go for a follow-up. Tough questions today.
I like it. No, it's good.
My follow-up would be if more, there are more funders who fund research, but say, this is a one and done kind of funding, and I want sustainability afterwards, ideally in the form of a social venture. If you knew from the start that was the end point of the research, the hope anyway, do you think that would change some of how the research was done? For example, is it more likely that they might have non-research collaborators, such as charities that already work on the ground in the environment they hope to operate in, or governments, or businesses already there, who can help with the kind of more sort of practical delivery side once maybe the core research has been done?
That's an easier question because that was very leading, and the answer is obviously yes. When you're even doing normal grant funding, when you've got your partners lined up at the beginning, you can see that there's going to be an impact. That there's people care about the problem that you're doing research, and that's what having partners actually shows. And then secondly, having the potential to keep things going after the research is finished. I mean, you're more likely to get the funding that way. So I think that's obvious. But actually being able to demonstrate the pathway a few times might result in in a shift again towards this sort of model where you actually do need to think more at the beginning about who you work with. But that does cause a quandary as well, because if you're in certain pieces of research, you may want to keep certain partners at arm's length at the very beginning so that you're not perverting the results of the research.
But then I've got a follow-up for that. A lot of the toughest developmental challenges are in some of the most difficult environments where both the government and the rule of law don't necessarily adhere to the same standards as we might really aspire to have in the UK. Does that not create a reputational risk and a liability for universities creating social ventures that will then operate in those environments?
Yes, it does. And you have to, and that's where you really do have to work with partners in order to make sure that you're doing things well, first of all, legally, and then ethically.
Just to be clear, it's obviously not all developing nations, just in certain specific contexts, and those contexts could be reasonable, where things like civil war could break out, and there still might be a need for a social venture to provide a critical service. But in a state of civil war, a lot of normal practices aren't in place, and it becomes extremely difficult territory to operate. Would the social ventures then be, I think you've sort of answered this, but looking to work with, for example, international organizations like the World Bank or big charities in order to help them navigate those scenarios ethically?
Yeah, and large corporations as well, because the largest corporations have interests in many nations across the world, whether they're developed or developing. So it's any partner who is able to help navigate the space and the particular complexities in a particular region. That's always the best model. And actually, I've been working with a company up in Scotland who does precisely that. And I think it's going to be quite crucial for a lot of university spin-outs to really understand how they are going to operate legally and ethically in a lot of these countries.
So my final question then, and it's a favorite topic of mine. You mentioned earlier that you thought that the social ventures produced by universities would lean more towards the kind of high growth, scalable ones, or then that they would need to in order for the fund to work. That being said, do you think that we will see new types of social ventures emerge because they're research based? And if so, what do you think they might look like?
That's a good question. Yes is the answer. I think the university. I think the fact that a lot of these innovations have come from universities is key to them having a lot of success, because there's been a research project, it's been peer reviewed, it's been demonstrated to work, and the people who are experts in the field have agreed that whatever intervention, whatever technology has been presented actually works. It reduces risk, and it also increases interest, because people will look at these things and say, well, this isn't just some upstart trying to make a difference in the world. It's actually somebody's done a significant piece of work, and this could have a real impact. And I think it'll attract more partners. It has a potential for impact across lots of countries, depending on what the type of intervention is. And it also is in itself, as part of the rollout, will generate new research, which could then be done by which completes the loop in a way, because then you can actually do the research into the effects of the intervention to show whether they're working. And that has the potential to sort of generate new economies, microeconomies, in regions across the world. And I think it's sharing knowledge, which is what the university is all about. This is just another way of rolling it out and having a positive effect.
So, I mean, it was indeed a leading question, because this is also one of my sort of pet topics. And I guess to give my 2 pennies worth on this is that anyone you speak to in international development will say just how hard international development is. You might think there are easy answers, but usually there's a particular context, and that particular intervention might even work in one place and then for different reasons not work in another place. And maybe the plucky social entrepreneur that isn't familiar with all of this might think they're doing a really good job, and actually it's not having the effect they intend to. And from my point of view, if you have an academic who really understands a particular area and is now building a social venture to deliver on that, you have a much better chance of making a real impact, because there's all that research and understanding around the context, why this is the right way to solve the problem, or a good way, which you won't get with others. And I actually think increasingly that is being recognized by philanthropic and even impact investors, that you can't just confuse high growth with high impact. It has to be the right impact, and research is a pretty good way to de-risk that.
Which is why you need to get more stuff out of universities to get there. So if there are any investors watching this, invest in the New Impact 12 fund. If you want to find out more, the link will be here underneath, and do get in touch, and we'll introduce you to all the people that you need to do that.